Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Elizabeth Simpson, and I am the 2021 President of Atlanta Innovation Forum. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. Our forum showcases emerging technologies, startups, and innovators by delivering content-first programs. Join us again next month for another exciting program from the Women's Forum, injecting tech and logistics into vaccine distribution. A shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much for sponsoring us. Stable Kernel, Stone Resource Group, Carabiner Communications, and Right Point. If you'd like to volunteer with us, just go to our website, get in touch with one of us on LinkedIn, and please become a member. Tonight's program is Enterprise AI, Innovation, and Risk. So I'd like to introduce to you now our Innovator of the Month, Jonathan Arno.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. So I'm Jonathan Arno. I am the CEO of Fuel Trust. I'm the co-founder. My business partner and I are working in a number of industries. I'll tell you a little bit about Fuel Trust, but Liz, if you'll go to the next slide, I'll tell you what we're up to here. Tonight is our soft launch. We have been in stealth mode for the last 5 months. We've been clicking away on our keyboards, writing a lot of technology. The goal of what we're after is to solve the problems that complex industries have and the things that keep them from innovating due to risk exposure. We are building a risk provenance platform that is helping industries or cross industry to reduce waste, reduce fraud, and to lower compliance cost. And with that, that creates business opportunities for companies both to innovate and find new business opportunities throughout their life cycle. What we're doing here is more than just BPM or blockchain smart contracts that are really not applications. We're building applications on top of this risk provenance platform that determine the nature of each transaction. We assess the digital DNA of the individual transactions everywhere in the universe of that industry. And we correlate it to high probabilities of the transaction ancestry. We figure out what happened and where it happened along the way. And then with that, we determine where the origins of risk are that affect every transaction in the downline. That's the core of what the risk provenance platform does. Liz, the next slide, please. And so how do we do that? Well, we mentioned before, we are leveraging blockchain. It is a private blockchain. And what that's doing is protecting the data. It's allowing permissioned access and visibility throughout all of the counterparties of who has that access. But it's also allowing us to record in an immutable way the digital DNA of what happened, where it happened, who is the one that made it happen. And then we're collecting or creating meaningful insights leveraging AI. And then with our AI, we're actually able to find not just probabilities of risk, but the actual determination of the connections of risk and the probability of the outcomes of those. So this is really what we're doing. We're leveraging AI and blockchain together in order to create real business applications on top of a platform that's all about tying together complex business life cycles and identifying risk with it. So what are we up to? We have just launched our seed round. We're out there beginning to add on alpha customers. We're in alpha next week. We'll be in beta at the end of March. So right now we are seeking global integration partners so that we can onboard major clients. That's tying together their ERP or transaction systems, their EDI workflows, their interactions with their business partners, banking records, et cetera. So looking for global integration partners who can help us with the global companies that are our target markets. And then lastly, we do want to let you know that we still do have our seed round open. We do intend to keep that open until April. We're looking not just for any investor, though. We are looking for investors who bring value add, introduce us into an industry, are there to help us as a company to grow, there to help guide the way as we enter into new markets. So those are the types of investors we're looking for. We have created an alias at Atlanta Innovation Forum, or AIF, at fueltrust.io. If you'd like to get a hold of us, and then we hope that you'll look at our brand new website just launched today, and you can get some more information about our Risk Provenance platform from there. So with that, Liz, thank you. I'll close and hand it back to the panel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I like the alias. Appreciate the shout out. So we're getting ready to start our program. So I want to call your attention to a button that you should have in your controls for questions throughout this program. You may enter your question to the panel. And at the end of the discussion, we'll have a 10-minute Q&A, and we'll get to your questions. So please help us network with you, enter a question, and follow us on LinkedIn. So with that, Dan Driscoll, our moderator, will take you into the program.
Fantastic, Liz, thank you. I'm Dan Driscoll here. I'm a general partner with Panoramic Ventures. Many of you probably know us as BIP Capital. We rebranded like a week ago Monday. We've been the most active venture firm in Georgia for the last 6 years. We generally write checks in the Series A round, although we do a little bit of seed investing into B2B software companies in a variety of industries. I'm at the firm, I tend to do enterprise software, but also do development tools and infrastructure, which I think is why the lovely people at Atlanta Innovation Forum contacted me for this. I get that responsibility because I was a 35-year operator in software companies and tech-enabled services companies. And I jokingly tell people that I spent more than $200 million in software development over the course of my career. I ended up with about $20 million worth of software for that, so it makes me an expert in development tools and infrastructure. As a firm, we're seeing a ton of innovation around artificial intelligence. So when the crew asked me to moderate a panel on enterprise AI and the innovations occurring and the risks incumbent on using AI, I was very enthused to do so. Tonight we have with us Jonathan Arnault, Brian Beard, and we're I don't know yet whether we have Miles or not. We're hunting Miles. He was on the West Coast, I think, and he had delayed, so we're working to get him now. But we have a number of interesting things to talk about, and we're prepared to dive right into those. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves as part of the answer to the first question, and we'll dive right in, and you guys can store your questions up in the chat, and David Eisenson is managing that for us, and we'll come through at the end with your questions. So without further ado, if we can get Brian, Jonathan, and Miles, if he's joined us on camera. Thanks, guys. So the first question, and to me, one of the keys to this thing is really to take a second and define artificial intelligence, separate it from machine learning and deep learning. Every company we see comes in and tells us they're doing artificial intelligence, but there's obviously different levels of that, and the technologies that we're seeing are doing different things. So let's first give you a chance to each of you to introduce yourselves, and we'll then roll right into your answer to kind of what you see AI being and how you define that. So I'm going to start with Brian, Jonathan, since you had a chance to get your voice warmed up already. We'll get his vocal cords rolling.
Nice to meet everybody. I'm Brian Beard. I am the CEO and founder of Data Visualization Intelligence Incorporated, more commonly known as DVI. And we've been around for about 4.5 years, and with a core product in the marketplace since 2018. And what we do is we aggregate data, namely in the travel and fintech and expense management space. And it's really complicated, but we do use components of AI. A little bit of my background, back through the early 2000s, I was the guy running emerging technologies for Toyota. So Toyota North America, which was a great job. And then I was stolen away by General Electric, and I was on the corporate initiatives team and ran huge technology innovation projects across General Electric. So that's kind of a little bit my background. Got me into travel about 7 or 8 years ago, and I've never left. And now I'm kind of merging into fintech. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll go over to Jonathan.
Very good. So my name is Jonathan Arnault. I am the CEO of Fuel Trust. I most recently, before Fuel Trust, was running IBM Cloud for North America. I had been running IBM Cloud for about 10 years, since its infancy, before we even called it that. And then in a number of roles for the 5 years before then. So I was at IBM for 15 years. After being acquired, it was my 5th time being acquired, and it stuck for quite some time. I was an engineer, but I have gotten the executive lobotomy. My folks remind me of that quite often. And I've done 4 startups. This is my 5th. And the first one was a little company right after I left GE of deploying the company's products, called Netscape. So I started my vendor career at Netscape, a lot of innovation, one of my most favorite times. Did a number of startups or turnarounds right after that. Have always been in the building mode, either building software, building programs, or building a business throughout my career. And now starting Fuel Trust, really trying to solve some incredibly complex problems that have dogged the industry for literally decades, in one case over 100 years. So glad to be at it again.
Perfect. So Brian, if you could talk to us about your definition of AI and differentiate it, if you would, from machine learning and deep learning.
So let me start by saying that AI is probably the new most overused buzzword across almost all industries today. I mean, it basically is equivalent to the way we were using big data about 5 years ago. And I will say that the definition of AI most people get is from like movies and books and television, and that is nowhere near, we're nowhere near that today. So AI itself has a number of components that really make up AI. Machine learning is one of those components, computer visualization or identification, natural language processing, reasoning, identity detection. There's a number of things that kind of fall under that category of AI, but artificial intelligence itself, really, you can define it in almost 3 different areas. There's weak AI, and then a strong AI. Strong AI is what most people think of, like computers doing and acting like humans. But weak AI is where you use specific tasks of a computer to perform something better, cheaper, faster than what a human can do. For example, if you go to a automated teller, or if you go to something, there are things that can do better than what humans used to be able to do. But I will also say a lot of people get confused with automation and AI. Automation is, if you look at a production line, like at an automotive plant, and a computer is welding, parts together, or installing bolts or screws, or those type of things, that's automation. AI is something that actually thinks and has to make decisions. So AI is the evolution of automation. And Jonathan, that's a long-winded answer, and I'll let you go next.
No, I agree with everything you said. I was going to say that it's the most overhyped word since nano. As soon as I saw nano on a shampoo, I knew that that was it. It had reached the hype level. Having worked with IBM Watson for the last many years, I've seen exactly the same things, where folks want to use AI much like in the movies and don't know how to get there. And then I would also say I see the other side of that, where, just as you've said, people are automating tasks, leveraging semi-AI. It's not quite really that. It's either machine learning or automation. A lot of those things are chat bots, help desk bots, et cetera, et cetera. And they are helpful, but the promise of AI has not really been laid hold of in many, many cases. I think we're just now beginning to see people dream a little and code a little toward making AI stand in and augment things that human beings do to make processes better. I will say what I believe AI is, just as you said, we've got machine learning, which is automating a task and having the machine learn how to optimize repetitive motions or functions. And then you've got real AI, which it understands the context. It understands the impetus, the initiative, or the current state and the desired state of what something should be. The Mars lander that happened today, it was using that middle form AI, trying to, and determining how to land using inboard intelligence, right? They were not controlling that system. It was controlling itself based on the real-time, real-world objective that it was given. And even there was not full AI. We're nowhere close to what the movies would be. And we won't be for quite some time. But AI versus machine learning is machine learning how to optimize repetitive tasks and or how to create functions to achieve a goal that it's been told to. Whereas AI has understanding of the context and the meaning of things around it and can determine what it should do by itself.
Right. And I'll also add to that, and you're totally right, Jonathan, like deep learning, I think, is even a further subset of machine learning, using neural networks and other, to be able to help make decisions. So it's nested inside of, sub products of AI.
So you'd both argue that machine learning and deep learning are effectively segments or components of AI.
They're building blocks of it, yes.
Absolutely.
Let's go then to kind of the next area that, so as a VC firm, like you guys, the hype of the term is such that we see every day, every company that comes in says they're doing AI, right? And mostly what we actually see is machine learning, although we see a great deal of natural language processing. But a lot of the places we see it making actual progress is where it's embedded in other applications. So as an example, we have a portfolio company, Cobiton, who is using arguably machine learning, but maybe a little bit bordering into AI, to gen test scripts to test a huge variety of mobile native applications. So, you build the stuff on an iPhone 12 and with iOS 14.x, and you want to test it on, device and operating system combinations that have 90% market share in Europe, and it can go through and from a single test and generate the test scripts for the other 590 devices and operating system combinations that requires. So we see, kind of AI embedded in other stuff. We do see some standalone companies where they come in with, kind of a more pure, we're an AI tool company, or I don't think we're seeing any anymore that come and say we're a machine learning tool company. They're all AI now. But talk about kind of where you're seeing adoption in the enterprise, how far you think some of that's moved along, and that each of you are seeing or have seen recently in what you're doing.
Jonathan, why don't you go first? Because
right. So clearly today, the most prolific use of real-world AI that the average consumer can see is with Tesla. Tesla has really embedded real AI into every automobile they have. They've created their own custom chips in order to optimize that. The determinations that it's making as it's driving are real-world AI. It's not just simply machine learning, although there's a significant amount of that. It's making determinisms of what is this? Is this a threat? How do I react to it? What's the optimal way to it? And really deciding for the driver or alongside the driver, what is the best outcome of this action? So it's much more than machine learning. It's contextual understanding. And I think that's the most that you're seeing people. And that's a real world application that just happens to be behind a robot called a car. I'll hype on my own company. One of the things that we are doing is using real AI to go out and understand incredibly complex business interactions that we don't have connections to coming from some other source. The AI is having to go figure out, what is this thing? What are the next connections? What are the deep components of it? What does that mean? And then what connects it? And then tying together and creating all the strings of those. Those are real world applications of using real AI. And as Brian said before, machine learning is by necessity a subcomponent of it, because it's having to iterate and iterate in order to get that understanding that AI can then make actions based upon that. The last I'll say, I should have just posted it on LinkedIn the other day. When I was at IBM, I worked with Humana in order to help their geriatric nurses provide patient care to the geriatric patients remotely and in-house in their hospitals. That is semi-AI, but it is a real AI application sitting behind a nursing management or patient management application. And it actually is trying to determine what the patient is describing in whatever terms or language that they're using. So it's some language understanding, including colloquialisms, and then recommending things to that nurse or doctor about what this might be, and then reaching into the vast deep knowledge, deep learning, and then bringing forward recommendations for that person to act on with the other person. So those are some real world examples that are out there today that people are actually using or will shortly be using.
Yeah, and let me add to that, because that is a great answer. And I think most of what you're describing, Jonathan, is what the world terms as kind of weak AI, right? It's like, yes. And just so you know, it is all around us, right? I mean, there are a lot of companies, if you look at Google and how they do their predictive search algorithms, that's using some of the weak machine learning and AI tools. Facebook uses it, Twitter uses it. It's been in the news for Twitter in terms of flagging content lately in the politics and that kind of stuff. But it's all over. Tesla's a great example, but there's many other companies, on the financial side, using it for fraud detection on credit card scans and those type of things, looking for specific patterns. Like if you see a 2-cent transaction at some random gas station, and then you see a bigger transaction after that, it flags it as potential fraud, and you get a notification on your text saying, hey, can you verify that you made these transactions? These are things that are happening today that are all components of AI, but they're weak. They're using machine learning. Like in our company, as you mentioned, kind of years as well, we use it to aggregate and match data that comes in from different data sources at different times, and those type of things. And then not only do we use machine learning to kind of identify patterns from purchases and bookings and stuff on the travel side, but then we also add the natural language processing, which is another component of weak AI that says, if you want to say how many people are in Memphis right now, or how many people are going to Seattle next month, or how much did we spend on Hilton last quarter, you can ask your phone and it'll answer you now, those type of things. So these are all components, but I still think it's what I consider the weak AI, not true artificial intelligence, but this is what you're seeing all over the place popping up. People are solving problems where they used to have a human making decisions about a specific task or a specific part of business that now can be potentially automated using some of these components. And we're going to see for the next 30 years this continuing to ramp up, and as we get closer and closer to the true, what I call, real AI.
So guys, let's talk about that for a second and dig in a little deeper. So within the enterprise, are you seeing them buy those things as part of other applications they're buying, or are you seeing them invest in tooling and people and building their own capabilities?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I see companies that, and in fact, the companies I deal with across are almost all investing in their core business model in some type of efficiency and AI and machine learning and some type of components, reasoning, those type of things. So I see that companies are definitely investing. It's probably going to be one of the top 2 or 3 major investment areas in the next 5 years for sure, and it is today. But I also see we live in the app generation. We live in the cloud generation, and people are, I've got an app for that, or I've got a process. So I see much more of the buy versus build and components of third parties. And you've mentioned a number, Dan, startups that you're working with, people those are all things where there's consumption of products that have components of AI in them. I definitely see this trend continuing.
Yeah, I would agree. I still see a significant amount of tool purchasing or using them in the cloud, absolutely. And I think that is simply by the nature that there are not yet enough industry applications available. And the originators of AI are the cloud-based companies, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and the business they're in is providing the tooling. And so there is this disjointed message in the market of one, go build, go build, go build, and then the other, which is I need, can I buy it? And Dan, as you had intimated earlier, a whole lot of companies say AI, but it's really not. We're getting there though. The market is beginning to catch up with applications that actually do have real AI, that have real business value, not just some nice add-on widget or function with a little cool feature. We're beginning to see real AI come out, or as Brian said, weak AI or third generation AI is now beginning to be built into real business applications.
And interesting enough, Dan, I think there's going to be huge impact on like employment and the types of jobs, because as we saw with automation, where now there's a lot less need for people to work on factory lines and those type of things. Same type of thing with AI. It's going to really retool the workforce a little bit over the next number of years.
So let me move on, because we can spend all night talking about that. But so turning from the innovation side to the risk side, as we get pitched all the time in terms of different tractability of various approaches to AI. Symbolic logic approaches to AI, to machine learning versus neural networks versus how tractable natural language processing is, and then different industry requirements. So, regulated industries tend to really care a lot more about that. Somebody told me the other day, FAA has got a huge push to only have tractable, Brian, you're having a little light problem there. Tractable AI applied in aerospace. Let's talk a little bit about the risks. And then don't forget to talk about bias as well, because everybody reads how machine learning models have all been accused of learning from data that's already got bias built in. So talk a little bit about the various risks that people look at and are concerned about as they go about implementing this stuff.
Jonathan, why don't you take that one first?
Well, now you're in my bailiwick, right? So we're building a risk provenance platform exactly for that. So firstly, I think it's important that we don't, when we look at risk, we do not, as you mentioned, Dan, look at it with the traditional bias of this is what risk defined is. We want to train the AI and let it make some really inquisitive looks at data. So train your AI actually to be inquisitive rather than tell it go look for these things. Then you're really dumbing it down. But more importantly, finding where risk may not be obvious. So in other words, unlike just writing, I many years ago I ran a program for New York State for the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. We were writing analytics, we were writing algorithms against databases, trying to find thresholds. People are still using AI like we did writing, ANSI SQL 92 lookups. So that's crazy. We need to really not say this is what risk means. We need to lay into it the regulations, right? Because I'm working in heavily regulated industries, Brian is. But then how do we turn those regulations and let the AI begin to actually understand it in the contextual language of it? So it's tying together a whole lot of things that you mentioned, Dan, right? So one of it is natural language processing. The second is trying to do the non-biased load. The third, and is not mentioned there, but is the back propagation. How do you debias not only a data set, but actually the trends that AI will learn from? Because AI, it's almost like YouTube or Facebook. Once it thinks something, it's going to push you down that rat hole instead of unbiasing that and seeing well-roundedness. That is something that's really important as we build either platforms or applications that solve problems with AI. But on the other side, I think it becomes necessary of those that are consumers of them to run bias tests. And there's really not a good mechanism today for that bias test analysis. So.
Yeah, like I totally agree. So tractability and bias are two weaknesses that have yet to be overcome, when dealing with, whether it's machine learning or reasoning or any type of the components. And just for an understanding, a bias, as you mentioned earlier, might be something that if you're developing, something to look at traffic patterns and identify, speeders and that kind of stuff, and something happens where a lot of BMWs are pulled over for speeding, the computer doesn't know the context. He may automatically assume, or the computer may assume, that all BMWs are speeders. Those are biased things. It has no context. It has no, it can't think outside the box. It's only going to think about what you've programmed into it, from a machine learning standpoint. We deal with it all the time. We try to adjust our machine learning models, and sometimes we've solved one problem, but we've created two new ones, that actually then tweak finances and throw them into wrong buckets of things. And so realistically today, I see to affect tractability and bias, the teaching and the bias models that machine learning algorithms and other AI components do, you have to have manual supervision to then go in and say, yeah, that doesn't look right, that doesn't feel right, and let's go tweak it. There's no other way to do it until a computer can be smart enough to think about contextual situations, understand, what I'm looking at, and say, oh, that really doesn't make sense to what I need to get to.
Let me also mention there are some things that we can do. So one is the back propagation. There actually is algorithmic methods in order to debias data sets and/or AI learning. I agree with Brian. There has to be a manual intervention, manual inspection to purposefully detrain bad habits. The Microsoft AI chatbot that suddenly became a racist overnight because somebody added that in there. I mean, they had to deprogram that thing from what it learns. And so that can happen in risk. It can happen in any of the outcomes. The other thing I think, and I want to get back to the risk model here, is if you let AI, if you train it so that it actually is real AI, right? Third generation, fourth generation AI, and that even fourth generation is just coming to the fore, it can find things that human beings wouldn't easily. We would normally have a data scientist, or we would have a researcher or somebody with 30 years in the business that kind of had a notion and was looking for anecdotal evidence. We are doing an analysis right now on a monstrous data set that it's a bunch of parametric data in a heavily regulated industry, billions of dollars in fines for non-compliance. And one of the things our work found that the AI was able to look through where human beings have really just bypassed it. There were thresholds of acceptability, and then you've got the snowball effect, right? At step 1 or step 20, there was a threshold that was met, and then step 21, that acceptable error rate then added on top of it, and suddenly we went from a 0.01% error acceptable. At the end of it, the snowball effect, we were at a 2% error, which was way beyond the compliance threshold and was going to be a $5 million fine for this industry or this company. Those things, AI looks around and says risk at the first step or the third step, right? You're beginning to see this propagation that occurs. Human beings, it's very hard for us to look at those things and begin to add them up or tie them up. Or if we do, we write an algorithm and then we miss all of the nuances, all the variances that could come from that. And so there's a good way in which AI applied to risk can actually provide not only cost-saving benefit, but opportunity benefit for a better outcome through a business process.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree to that. And one of the things that's going back to my point is that a lot of people probably went through in maybe the late 90s, 2000s, like outsourcing, your computer programming and stuff to different offshore models. And one of the things you learned if you'd ever done that is that you better define to a T exactly what you want, because what you give in requirements is exactly what you're going to get back, no matter if it's right or wrong. AI is very similar to that if you don't define what the models look like that the computer is going to learn from, you're going to get exactly what you asked for, and that may be right or wrong. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of bias and tractability.
So to get back to what Jonathan was saying, and I'll take this into real layman's terms, even though I have, so you're saying there's algorithms to depropagate. So the famous saying is that, what does a dog teach a young boy? Perseverance, loyalty, and to turn around 3 times before he goes to bed.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is you can run algorithms to lead the perseverance and the loyalty and eliminate the turn around 3 times before bed, and then let the AI work from that point forward. and that you can use AI to identify those pieces that are risk inherent or nonsensical. Is that what I heard you say, Jonathan?
I think you certainly can, but that takes work, right? It takes it. So so I use this analogy all the time when we were beginning to work with Watson and bring it into commercial applications. It was a child that had to be taught how to grow up, and even today, we're at 3rd generation AI, which means AI is at about a 12-year-old state. You still have a whole lot of training and growing to do, even though it's capable, even though it can carry its own and do a whole lot. You need to continue the training, the mentoring, the teaching of that AI to make it fully useful. And that never ends. And then the back propagation is when you see people get bad habits, you need to work on going back to basics and stripping out those bad habits. That will always have to be a discipline of AI.
Yep, agreed.
Perfect. All right, let me move us on to so I'm gonna actually, it's 6:39. I think we're supposed to go to questions at 6:45. We've got about 5 minutes to do this last one, and maybe we can even do it in less than that. And I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of questions. So, given what we got, who is doing a good job of this at the enterprise level?
I'll let you start, Brian.
So, Jonathan?
Well, I think that obviously we mentioned, that those companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, the companies that are really investing heavily and know that it's part of their fundamental business model going forward are really driving a lot of these innovations, and a lot of the tools that other companies, the small startups and those type of things are using to be able to advance AI, in the right way. I would also say that governments are investing in it, specifically, and also, I would say, healthcare, especially about diagnosing, specific illnesses, looking at data over, thousands and thousands or millions of data sets and trying to detect patterns is also advancing pretty rapidly. Jonathan, do you have another?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree with that. I would say banking, interesting, or financial services, other than trading, trying to find opportunities, I would say they're quite a bit behind, and that worries me. Governments, for good and bad, are rapidly advancing. I have done quite a bit of work with many of the governments around the world, and they are heavily investing in tooling and in applications that they can apply that to. Healthcare, I will say, is getting there. The promise and the investments that are being made, they are making advances, but much like trying to cure cancer or COVID, it's healthcare, and the human body is an incredibly complex mechanism. And while AI has helped them go much faster, the human part of teaching the AI is not yet advanced enough to really help them with all the promise that it could have. So I would agree with all of the areas that Brian has said. I will say robotics, AI is at the machine learning phase for the most part. I would say with telemetry, AI is really being applied well. So it's only in part of the machine robotics component that they're really taking advantage of that, particularly in manufacturing. It's mostly machine learning, not real AI.
Yeah, and I would add one, as you kind of sparked a memory, is like transportation. I think those things like with automated driving, electric vehicles, and things that are coming out, I think there's a component there that's actually being advanced pretty far along as well. So.
Well, let me take you straight into that then. So, if you buy Jonathan's precept that AI is only 12 years old, and you guys work with it every day, how do you feel about it driving cars?
Well, I have a 15-year-old now that just got his permit in Florida, so he scares the willies out of me, even though he's a fairly good driver. And sometimes when we are handing over a very complex business process, $100 billion industry, telling AI to go tell people what to do, yeah, that scares the willies out of me sometimes. And yet, you have to teach it how to drive in order for it to be responsible and be on its own and or take advantage of it. So look, I said it last year at a forum in Louisville, the robots are not coming for us. I'm not afraid that AI will run off on its own. What I am afraid of is that we get lazy and don't let AI fulfill its whole promise, right? Nano and quantum, those are tremendous technologies, and yet we're just kind of shuffle our feet instead of letting us take real advantage. AI is kind of the same way.
Yeah, so and to go to your question, Dan, and I, by the way, I agree with Jonathan on this as well. But I think that electric vehicles and the automated, driving mechanism, it's getting there. It's obviously, but the whole Tesla example of the person that was killed driving a Tesla, and I don't know if you've looked in this one, but it's really interesting. Tesla was approved for automated driving on highways, but when they were doing the test on off the highways on side streets, it identified a truck at a cross section of a truck as opposed to the back of a truck as a street sign and drove right into that truck. So these are the type of things they programmed exactly what they thought from a highway driving, but they had never anticipated the off-highway driving. And this is a perfect example. It's getting there. There's going to be some trial and error. There's got to be some models that get enhanced over time. So it gets to the point where I think it's truly bug-free.
Fantastic, guys. Well, thank you for the your deep answers to those questions. Hopefully, that's given people a pretty strong view of what enterprise AI is, where the innovations are occurring, what risks there are in adoption, and how people are going about it. I'd like to get David Eisenson involved, and he's been receiving the questions that have been coming in through chat. So, David, are you? What do you got?
Yeah, and just a reminder, the audience, there still is some time, so feel free to post questions, and if you want to post them to a specific person, that's fine. Why don't we start with sort of the look ahead, Dan, and however you want to field this, but where is AI going? Take a look in the crystal ball and make a prediction about, maybe a less than bold prediction for a few years down the road and more than bold for 5 or 10 years down the road.
So, gentlemen, I'll just let you guys go. 5 years and 10 years.
Come on, Dan, you're putting your money behind this. What do you think?
Well, I recently got in a guy's Tesla in the passenger seat, and he didn't touch the wheel between here and Jacksonville. So,
Yeah.
I'm happy for the 12-year-old to drive the car.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say that Tesla made some great enhancements after they found some bugs in their self-driving stuff, so they can react very quickly using that. I'll take a whack at it, and it's interesting because over the next 5 years, I see the proliferation of kind of what we call the third level AI, the weaker AI, to solve a lot of business decision-making problems that used to take a huge amount of human resources and now can be done quicker and faster. I mean, you saw that the previous slide, AI is everywhere and it's continued to be everywhere. If you're an investor out there, I would say most of the investments are going to be companies that are solving some problem using some component of AI, machine learning, something out there, neural networks, thinking, in whatever industry you're in. And it will only continue to get better. And as Jonathan mentioned, those models and the ability to get rid of bias and some of those things in those models will even get better. So it's just more prolific in our society, just growing, and that's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. After that, I really don't think we get to true AI for 30 to 50 years. It's further away. I mean, and then when you add the robotics component, to where you have something that's functioning in terms of kind of a robotic helper or something, that's way off because there's so many components that need to come together. But what I do see that's going to happen is something where we're going to have these personal avatars, right? It's the evolution of the Alexa or the Google Home, where on your device somewhere, you're going to have something that follows you around and helps you make better decisions, tracks your time, makes you bookings for you if you need to go to Seattle on Thursday and those type of things. And it's going to really help out productivity. And I think that's a component of AI that I see happening probably in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's going to, by necessity, it's going to advance to such a level of consumption that we stop talking about it. We anticipate it's already going to be there. When you get your Alexa or your Google Home or whatnot, you're not saying, I want a machine that's got AI, you want this service. And under the covers, there's a whole lot of both machine learning and algorithms and AI that's coming to fore. So, as it becomes more prolific, the less visible it will become. Is just part of the fabric of what we're expecting out of applications. I have to tell my customers or investors today that we are leveraging AI to do this really complex thing that can't be done elsewhere. I expect in 5 years, I'm not going to have to say that. I'm just going to say we solve this problem using our technology. And that means that we have leaped over the chasm once we get to that spot in the technology, the development of AI in real world applications. And that's something we should look forward to.
David,
Absolutely.
do you have another a couple of questions?
Yeah, I'm actually sorry. I'm not as prolific as I'd like to be in scrolling through these in this. So there's a question on. Let me try and interpret this in a way that makes sense, at least to me. There's a question about how building AI capabilities in an organization might result in the term is used is shortage of people, but I think impact, automation and things like that, to the point that either people get reduced in RIF'd or at least forced to change their roles within organizations, and concerns about that, or how that is going to influence industry in coming decade.
David, I think let's take that in a different direction first, and maybe we'll come to that second. The first one let's take is, what kinds of people are going to be needed for enterprises to build AI capabilities in-house? Data scientists, machine learning people, what are the skill sets that are going to be in high demand over the next couple of years?
I would say that, many of the technology skills will be more in demand. I see organizations being much heavier on the technology skilled people than the people that are performing non-technology related jobs, like in HR or in more administrative tasks. Because any of the administrative tasks, I think that are repetitive, that have limited number of decision points, will pretty much be phased out. But also I see a lot of people that need to service, those components of those things that have been replaced by AI. So it'll actually create jobs that we don't even have defined right now. And that's happening, and there'll be college programs and things that open up for those new positions. And it's really hard to understand, but it's happened in every single wave, whether it's automation, whether it's, even back in the early 1900s, the new positions were created when any technology advances.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me say that by its very nature of any technology advancement, it is those who do not wish to change what they do that fall behind. And that's important for industry at any level to recognize, and every individual to recognize. AI is not there to take your job. It's there to take the soul-crushing, repetitive grist mill away from your job, right? As all automation does. The other, though, is it is providing enhancements. It's giving you your life back. Accountants used to spend 90% of their day doing math, as opposed to understanding the law, understanding opportunities of finance, looking for risk, looking for problems. Now they are a much higher level of knowledge worker. The same thing will become true of every area of a business, and it's those who always have done the repetitive task and they're experts at the repetitive task. Those are the ones that really will need to reskill or rethink their approach to the world in order to take advantage of AI. Let AI augment what they do so they can do so much more, or go do the thing you always wanted to do but you couldn't because you're in this soul-crushing job. I think AI gives a lot of opportunity, except for those that don't want to do something better.
So let's go more tactical for a minute. So let's talk a little bit about, literally in the technology capability build for enterprises, what kind of people are going to be in demand?
I'll let you go, Brian.
Well, coders for sure. It's people that could write in the emerging languages and understand data and data science, and actually can do development on a data level as well. So it's those people are going to be huge in, because data drives everything with AI, and those people that can create those algorithms, the machine learning algorithms, and work with those tools are going to be huge knowledge workers in the future.
Yeah, I will say there's a few things that are necessary. and it'll require a change of mindset. So we do need people that have got real PhDs in mathematics that understand how to take business transactions, business understanding, and turn those into algorithmically defined processes, not just block step processes like BPM. That will be necessary. I wouldn't say so much as data scientists, but really data stewards. What is this data? Where should it go? How should it be organized so that AI can consume it without organizing it such that it has a bias? That will become extremely important. That's more than just a DBA. That's actually somebody who, almost like a librarian for the enterprise. That will become really important. Certainly coders are important. And then I think there is this, we've seen this in the enterprise as a whole for a good 25 years now, the hybrid person, the person who is a business expert, but understands the technology that they're using or need underneath that. The blend between an IT specialist and a person who is a business specialist, those things by necessity are going to have to blend further than they've gone in the last 25 years. I don't know a business person that doesn't understand at least some of the core of the IT that they're using every day. I think they're going to know more than just the core. They're going to understand how to innovate and work hand in glove with the deep IT specialists, those creators, in order to bring to fore some of the things the business need. That type of role doesn't exist today, and that's something that enterprises need to look to.
Right, and it really is. You're absolutely right. Just the visionaries, right? It's to be able, somebody that can look at a business process, a complex business process, and say we could do that better. They may not have to know how to code it themselves, but they can actually explain it and what the benefits are and what it is, so somebody else could actually build that into a learning system.
Yeah, and I think you'll find a whole lot like the three of us that started out as technologists, as engineers, and have garnered the business process component that are the leaders of that change in the marketplace. People, the business-centered folks will look to emulate us more, and the IT-centered folks will look to emulate folks like us more in order to approach it of this is how to make it work, and this is what it should do when it works. I think that is key in the future of innovation, especially with AI. AI needs to be taught, but you have to understand both the IT and the thing it needs to do together.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can also say that, to your point, we need more teachers, right? It's like, those people that can, and we've said that forever. It's like, but it's not just teaching people. Now you're teaching computers. So it's like you need those people that can actually spell out exactly and think about the consequences of what happens when it goes wrong. Those people are going to be worth their weight in gold.
So we're a couple of minutes over now. I think we do this all night. I think we better get Liz back to do the wrap up so we can finish on time. But gentlemen, it's been great to have you on the panel. Obviously, you're hugely knowledgeable in this area, and thank you for sharing. And we really appreciate you joining and sharing your knowledge with everybody that was able to attend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, great program. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Jonathan. So sorry we missed Miles, but I hope he's having a wonderful time wherever he is on vacation, well deserved. Join us again next month for our exciting program about injection of technology and logistics into vaccine distribution, brought to you by Women Driving Innovation, a special interest group of Atlanta Innovation Forum. Thanks again to our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. And thanks to you, our audience. Without you, we wouldn't be here. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening. Good night.